Hello, everyone, and welcome to our lecture 4, week 4. We will talk about environmental challenges, economics, and conflict. So, what do we see in these pictures? We see actually some symptoms of climate change that is currently happening. The scientists agree that global temperatures will continue to rise for decades to come, largely due to the greenhouse gases produced by human activities. And what is the biggest culprit? Which greenhouse gas is actually the biggest culprit? It's CO2, carbon dioxide. But there are also other greenhouse gases that can be dangerous. And how are they produced? Well, they are produced by burning fossil fuels mostly. There are also other ways, but that's the most prominent ones. And then that's why we are trying to move towards more what they call green energy. Okay, so you see here the pictures of floods, droughts, fires that affect people, their lives, and they destroy crops, they bring disease, they bring about eventually conflict, and they cause migration of the population. And the UN represents kind of it's an intergovernmental organization, international organization, but it's also an international forum for tackling global problems such as climate change and ozone layer depletion, toxic waste, loss of forests and species, air and water pollution. So this forum that's put together by the UN, United Nations, has grown out of the responsibility for the common good and the future generations. Okay, so this is an interesting image. And the main argument about this image is that it shows the variability of the climate, of the temperatures in particular. So temperatures, as you can see, in tropical climates will become far more variable than in moderate areas. So the larger the swings, so this swings from high to low temperatures and vice versa, and the more often extremely hot or cold conditions occur, this can wreak havoc and cause natural disasters. So these abrupt changes will bring about such catastrophic events such as fires, floods, droughts, big storms, hurricanes, and so on. So they are a major problem. As we can see in this image, is that the most affected countries are developing countries such as, for example, Colombia, Brazil, Liberia, Zimbabwe, and so on. So global warming is often used as a synonym for climate change, and most discussions of the topic focus on the expected increase in average global temperatures, right? That's what when we think about global warming, that's what we think, right? The temperatures will go up. However, the frequency and severity of individual catastrophic weather events depend heavily on the variability of temperatures as well as their mean. So these abrupt changes from hot to cold and vice versa, that is the problem. As I already mentioned, this may lead to floods, this may lead to fires, to droughts that destroy infrastructure, crops, sanitation system, that may lead to different disease and so on. So droughts for example, in the Amazon. So we can see in the red, you see the countries that are in the red, they will have these abrupt temperature changes, and one of these countries is Brazil. And we all know that Brazil is important because it holds large areas with a forest, with a rainforest, with the Amazon, the river Amazon, and so it is foreseen that there might be droughts in the Amazon in the next few decades. So as the planet warms, soil in areas near the equator will dry up, reducing its ability to dampen temperature swings. So this problem is expected to be acute in the Amazon rainforest. And we know, well, if droughts happen in the Amazon rainforest, and Amazon rainforest is considered the lungs of the world, so this can also be this can have a lot of consequences for humanity and the world as a whole. Okay, so the temperatures in tropical climate will become far more variable, as we saw in that previous image. So these areas are sub-Saharan Africa and South and Central America. Countries in the northern latitudes, which are mostly developed and rich, will not be affected nearly as much by changes in soil moisture. So far from the equator, countries will actually see smaller temperature fluctuation because of changing atmospheric patterns. So in terms of both means and variances, the countries that bear the most historical responsibility for climate change are likely to be the ones least harmed by its consequences, right? So industrial nations, developed countries that contribute to two-thirds of the gas emissions, green gas emissions, they are believed to be causing global warming, especially China and the US. Well, look at the picture. They will be spared of these temperature fluctuations, right? And they are the ones that are causing a global warming. Okay, so this image shows the impact of climate change on human health. For example, we can see that there may be an impact in terms of viruses and diseases. Spread of viruses and diseases is called changes in vector ecology. So diseases such as malaria, hantavirus, and so on, these all sorts of insects that are potential carriers of different viruses might be forced to leave their usual habitat and move into other habitats, which may cause the disease spread. And you can see that destruction of crops may lead to lack of resources, which then may cause conflict and forced migration and so on. So this is kind of already happening, but there are predictions that it might get even worse than it is now. Okay, so as we mentioned, the UN represents this international forum for tackling environmental challenges, and the UN helps developing countries too to respond to the challenges of global climate change. Because the developing countries not only they don't have enough resources to address these challenges that come with climate change, but their infrastructure, sanitation systems, health services are already weakened and are not adequate enough to help the population. So now they are even more stressed with this climate change. So these countries again require more help from the international community. So as I said, the UN represents this international forum for tackling environmental change, and its goal is to build consensus and negotiate agreements on environmental challenges. Because, as we saw, not all countries are projected to be impacted in the same way. So some countries just lack interest or incentive, to join in this common fight against climate change. But UN is trying to bring all the countries together because this is a global problem that will affect directly or indirectly all of the countries in the world, right? So the UN has developed these sustainable development goals, and 4 of them are actually focusing on climate change and environmental degradation in particular. So goal 13 is about directly to combat climate change and its impacts. Goal 14 to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources. Goal 15 to sustainably manage forests and combat desertification. And goal 6 to ensure access to water and sanitation for all. So these are some goals that are directly addressing the challenges coming from environmental degradation and climate change. Okay, so how is the UN building consensus, and how does this diplomacy work? Well, the UN has something that's called the Environmental Panel on Climate Change, which brings together more than 2,000 leading climate change scientists. And in 2007, this panel concluded with certainty that climate change was occurring and that human activities were a primary cause for the climate change. And we know that this is, that there is some denial of that, but they have issued reports and evidence that support those claims. So we should really pay attention to the facts and to the evidence. There are about 39 UN bodies that form the partnership to deal with these issues, the issues of climate change. And the 196 members of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change are negotiating agreements currently to reduce emissions that contribute to climate change and help countries adapt to its effects. There is another agency called the UN Environmental Program, and there are other UN agencies that have been at the forefront in raising awareness about climate change and its effects and how we can address it. Because raising awareness is important, because there is so much of denialism of climate change, and this is a real problem that is becoming worse and worse. And if we don't do something now, we might not have a lot of solutions in the future. So we need to act now. Okay. So an important milestone was happened on Earth Day, 22nd of April 2015, when 175 world leaders signed a Paris Agreement at the United Nations headquarters in New York. And this was by far the largest number of countries ever to sign an international agreement on a single day. Later on, other countries joined, and we have now around 184 countries the joint Paris Agreement. It's important to say that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls climate change the defining threat of our time. For UNDP and UN partners and wider international community, the mission is really clear: to push for countries, communities, and the private sector to scale up its goals, its ambitions in addressing these challenges. Okay, so you probably know who this girl is. This is famous Greta Thunberg. She's an activist, environmental activist, and she started a school strike for climate and saving the world by changing the rules. So she basically refused to go to school for some time in order to draw attention of the state, of the public, to this problem of climate change, and that we have to do something about it. So she became quite famous, and I would encourage you to watch a YouTube video about her activities, and you can find that in the PowerPoint that I will publish on the Blackboard. Okay, so let's now talk about these disparities in the world that are causing conflicts and migrations, and something that we as a field have to be concerned with. So if we talk about it in today's terms, a world is no longer 1/6 rich and 5/6 poor. The world is becoming 1/6 rich, 2/3 okay, and 1/6 poor. Now, why is that? Because in the last few decades, we have these new rising economies. And what are those? What are those economies? We can say that these are primarily what we call the BRICS countries. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So these are the BRICS. They're the new rising powers in a more what we can see multipolar world, right? Especially China, that is really developing fast, and its economy is really almost surpassing the U.S., but not yet. Okay, well, but it's a rising power. So one important book that talks about those that are falling behind, this 1/6 of the poor, is called The Bottom Billion. So this famous British economist Collier wrote a book, The Bottom Billion, talking about this 1/6 of the world who are actually the poorest. And what he noted especially is that these poorest countries are falling behind progressively as the world is moving forward. So while we have the rise of these countries, the developing countries who are whose economies are booming, and there is this rise of the middle class and so on. And with this progress, we also see increased pollution and environmental degradation. But at the same time, there is also 1/6 of the world, almost a billion people, that are falling progressively behind. So these are poor people. And in these countries, average life expectancy is just 50 years. Can you imagine that? In the developed world, life expectancy is more than 70 years old, but in these countries it's 50 years. It shows you, what kind of child. That's some basic human needs, which we talked about in previous classes. Some basic human needs are not fulfilled. So, and also, like, around 1 in 7 children dies before the age of 5. Right? So this shows that health systems are not adequate, and these are this is something that's not happening in the developed world. So why are they falling behind? So 3/4 of the people in the bottom billion have recently been through or are still in the midst of civil wars. These wars usually last for years. So countries, let's say, Yemen can be one of these countries. Congo is another example of a country that has been ravaged by conflict. And additionally, they are also plagued by a resource curse, something Collier calls a resource curse, which means dependency on primary commodities. And this resource curse and dependency on primary commodities actually also brings about conflict. Why? So what are the primary commodities? Primary commodities are timber, minerals, diamonds, oil, and so on. So the countries that are rich in those natural minerals and oil and so on, timber, they basically just extract them and sell them. But at the same time, industry is not developing. Jobs are not created. And what usually happens is that elites or insurgents, men with guns, are the ones who control resources. So the profits from selling those resources, those primary commodities, are going directly into their pockets, right? And they're not, distributed to the populations. The population remains very poor, and works maybe for very little money, so maybe less than $1 a day. So that's how it is. And the money ends up in the pockets of few who have arms, who are part of the political elites and so on. So that's why it's called resource curse. These countries are rich with resources, but these resources do not contribute to the development of, let's say, middle class, so that profits from this primary commodities can be shared with people. No, they end up in the hands of the elite. And additionally, these countries are also surrounded by countries which are also unstable, that have conflicts. So Collier calls it bad neighborhood, plus bad governance. So as I already mentioned, these elites who are only taking care of, these are like oligarchs. They're taking care only of their own, of this and they take all the profits for themselves while people remain poor. So these are very corrupt elites. So as I mentioned, Congo. Congo is a country that's very rich in these primary commodities, in timber, minerals, diamonds, and so on. But Congo was plagued with conflict for a long time, and it would need 50 years of peace at its present growth rate to get back to the income level it had in 1960. So it's conflict takes the state backwards, right? So much backwards, and then to catch up with the rest of the world takes so much effort and so much time and so on, and catching up is difficult in any case. So once you had a civil war, once a country had a conflict, they are also likely to have more. So half of the civil wars, half of the wars are actually post-conflict relapses. So if you had a conflict before, there's more likelihood that you'll have conflict again. So it's somehow these countries are trapped in the vicious cycle of war. So why? Well, violent conflicts leave consequences. They not just on infrastructure and property and so on, but on people's they cause trauma to the people. They cause grievances, of the people that are not easily forgotten. So they're being kept alive through narratives, through media, through all sorts of things. And there is if you have a history of conflict or in a history of atrocities, it's much easier for conflict to occur again. So the likelihood of war increases also when we have a relatively high proportion of young, uneducated men. What does that mean? So many of these countries, the developing countries that are plagued by conflicts, they have high proportion of young, uneducated men. So these men, as we saw, the industry, the primary commodities are in the hands of the elites. But you have a lot of young population, a lot of children is being born, and then you have these men who are unemployed. They just cannot find jobs, and if they are armed, they are given, so they don't have any meaning in life, so they are easily recruited by the insurgents, and they are given arms, and all of a sudden that being part of a group that takes care of them, like give them some money to be part of that insurgency group. It's it's a no-brainer that it gives these young men meaning, and that also contributes to conflict, right? Because they're unemployed. If they were employed, if they had jobs, they wouldn't be so easily recruited by those insurgents. There is also imbalance between ethnic groups, with one tending to outnumber the rest. So you have this ethnic divide, and a group that is a majority group tends to take political power. If it takes political power, it will also have power over industry or resources and so on. And there is also in these places supply of natural resources like diamonds or oil. Now, especially diamonds are very, where you have diamonds, it's easy to have conflict because, and that's why we have this blood diamonds, because diamonds are easy to carry, they're easy to transfer, and they can help finance rebellion. So there are commodities which are easy to trade, which are easy to hide, and um, they are used to buy weapons, arms, to finance rebellion, to finance insurgency groups, and so on. And that's why we had this controversy over blood diamonds, diamonds that are financing conflicts. So, what can be done? What post-conflict countries need is at least 10 years of peace enforced by some external force, let's say UN peacekeepers. If that means infringing on national sovereignty, so be it. This is just a solution, that peace, that there has to be some kind of outside peacekeeping force in order to introduce the normalcy and stability in those societies. Also, as the manufacturing industry activity started to relocate to Asia, African economies simply got left behind. So the bottom billion countries, in order to help them develop their industry and manufacturing, they should be exempt from tariffs and taxes, right? So that their industry is helped in some way. And also, there should be more strict laws requiring Western banks to report deposits by kleptocrats, or there have to be charters to regulate the exploitation of natural resources, to uphold media freedom, and to prevent fiscal fraud. And so, if you have time, have a look at, for example, scandals with regards to blood diamonds and the involvement of some Western distributors in this trade. And I would recommend also to have a look at this video where you will hear Dambisa Moyo talking about the bottom billion and the poor countries and what should be done. So you will find this video in the PPT. And yes, so we had today a lecture on climate change, environmental degradation, economy, and poverty, and how all of this together influences conflict. And I have mentioned a few ideas on how this can be potentially addressed, but I would welcome your ideas in your blogs. And so thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.